Well, hello, Minders. Welcome back to the Mind of Watercolor. Steve Mitchell here, and I'm going to be coming at you today with a little tutorial. Sort of a light-hearted tutorial, a seasonal tutorial, as you can see by the Christmas ornament I have here. As you know, if you know much about me at all, I don't really like teaching how to paint a thing. I like teaching skills that are multi-purpose, and though we're going to be teaching you how to paint this thing, this is going to be also, I think, some multi-purpose skills that you can use in other things. So as always, I like my tutorials to just have lots of tips and things that you can consider no matter what you're painting. What we're going to be focusing on here is a highly reflective surface. And the reason this is such a good skill building thing is that reflective surfaces like this, and you can see here, you can see me right here, you can see my studio lights, you can see the window. I am in a very chaotic studio in terms of background. There's just all kinds of stuff, and reflective surfaces reflect all of that. And so to paint something with a reflective surface can be very frustrating. So a lot of simplification is usually needed, and we're going to be talking about that. This type of a rendering would involve some very careful washes. So this is a good video for planning out a discrete, fairly detailed object with a lot of controlled washes, which is good practice. And if you end up with something that you like, you know, you could paint something like this for a Christmas card or something. But I wanted to make this some seasonal fun while we learn some skills. And we'll be talking about the color and everything else. So I'm excited about this, and this will be fun. And let's see what we come up with.
Who's gonna stop me? Come on!
All right, I've got my ornaments drawn out. I want to show you two different ways to do this. Now, in reality, in a spherical metallic looking object, there can be hundreds and thousands even of ways that reflections can look. It's all dependent on the environment, but what I'm going to do is show you two general, sort of generic ways in which you can do highly reflective spheres. And of course, these are going to be great for a Christmas ornament. So I thought I was getting these the same size, but it looks like I made that smaller. It doesn't matter. The two different ways you usually see with chrome or highly reflective objects is a dark top and a light bottom. That's usually because they're sitting on a light surface and reflecting, or the reverse, a dark bottom and a light top. And the trick is just getting the contrast and the spectral highlights in there right. I'm going to go ahead and set in these lines. These are all drawn in watercolor pencil. So I'm going to set these in because with water, if I activate these with water, it kind of sets them, darkens them for one thing. But this will give me the line art to paint to. And they won't totally disappear quite as easily. I'm using a soft brush. By the way, this is a Dynasty Caviar. They're almost identical to Silver Brush Black Velvets. It's just been a while since I've used this, and I'm just kind of rotating through my brushes and trying different things. But a good soft brush would be excellent here. Silver Brush Black Velvets would be an excellent choice. I might ought to draw these bows a little darker, but it won't matter because I'll quickly do those at the end probably. Pre-drawing with watercolor pencil is an excellent way to go, especially if you can draw it in close to the colors and tones that the piece will end up in those areas, and it becomes more or less invisible when compared to graphite. This is an Arches cold press 140 pound block. I definitely don't want to skimp on this. I want to use my favorite of all papers because these washes are going to have to be tightly controlled, and there will be layering. Now, as we go through these, as I said, there's so many ways reflections can appear, but probably the most universal thing about these reflective ornaments and spheres is the roundness of it and how that affects the reflection. So everything you draw and paint on here will be affected by the spherical shape. More about that later. You know, and if you are into other mediums too, the techniques, or at least the schemes that I'm going to show you, you know, the rendering schemes, will work in any medium. Colored pencil, acrylic, gouache, in other words, the gradation and the shading patterns will work. Even graphite. Again, this would just be a really fun way, if you're a beginner especially, to practice nicely controlled washes. And I'm probably going to work on these simultaneously since I'll be waiting on some to dry. These ornaments will both be gold. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit about color. All right, I've drawn in where I want my spectral highlights to go. Now I'm going to do this in the beginning as transparent watercolor, meaning I'm going to paint around these highlights. But gouache is always a possibility here for adjusting these. So you don't need to get too worked up if you really feel like you are going to have a hard time managing your washes around these. Again, just like with the ornaments, I'm setting in this line to paint to and to keep it from completely disappearing while I paint. And I've drawn them in a couple different ways. Again, this is going to be the dark top, light bottom scheme. This is going to be the light top, dark bottom scheme. I think I'm going to add one more little shard of highlight over here. So the highlights are almost always in the top. For obvious reasons, lights are usually overhead. Now on a Christmas tree, I realize lights can be reflecting from every direction. But just follow me on this sort of generic approach first. And you can make these more complex, but I would go for a simpler version to begin with. And I just think it makes more sense to the eye when you're looking at it when the spectral highlights are overhead. Because in addition to the Christmas tree lights, you're going to get, lights from maybe the Christmas star, ceiling lights, that sort of a thing. Now, the one thing to note before we go any further is I just want to reiterate how all of these things, you can imagine this sphere in a 3D wire frame. So all of these things sort of follow that arc. This right here, this sort of dividing line that is so common, in chrome and reflective rendering, that usually represents the horizon line. In case of indoors, a ceiling to floor kind of meeting. And I like putting that in because it's just something that the eye more typically associates with reflection on a sphere. The fun thing would be just to take a reflective ball and put it in all kinds of environments and observe. But what you're going to be faced with is the complexity that you need to be able to simplify. And that's, one of the challenges. All right, I'm taking a sort of a light medium yellow. On my palette, it's Ingram Azo yellow. Hansa yellow would be great. Any kind of medium to light yellow. And since this is gold, a gold ornament, I'm just going to tone this whole thing. I'm going to work around those highlights. I actually can work right through. And you're seeing why I set in that watercolor line. Because if I didn't ahead of time, it might be disappearing by now. The watercolor pencil. Now I'm wanting to keep this whole shape wet. So you're going to see me going back over this. Arches cold press is thirsty, so it may take a few passes. I'll go back up here. Make sure my whole shape is damp. Because I want to do some wet in wet shading to begin with. And I'm going to probably paint that top separately. Alright, I'm going to just... As objects reflect in your sphere towards the outer edge, they not only are distorted to the shape of the sphere, but they're compressed. So out here where the bulb of the sphere is, they'll be stretched. So as the scene goes off in the distance, that usually means that these outer edges are going to be dark no matter where you are in the reflection. That's something right there. I can't get off my paper. Frustrating. I just probably scratched it too. I'm going to go ahead and color this bottom part but it'll need to dry before I make other passes. This will be a soft pass for that edge. So I'm gonna, this is where the divide between dark and light is. And this first pass, which is not really very dark, can be soft. I got something right there that's driving me crazy and I can't get it off. Little things like that can sometimes ruin your day. All right. Looking good. It already has some reflectivity to it. So future washes are going to be glazes, and I'm going to just let that dry. And we're going to do the exact same thing over here. The difference will come with future layers. So it's Azo yellow again, which I think is the same as Aureolin yellow, but Hansa yellow is a really good match. The yellow doesn't matter, as you know, I'm just painting a gold ornament, and so the lightest value of gold is usually a bright yellow. And if you have a hard time managing the wash on the entire ornament, then just do part of it. Again, I keep dabbing back over here because I'm trying to keep this all wet. Really good wash control practice. And I'm going to go ahead, carry that wash down into what will be on this one the lighter area. And again, just trying to keep it all wet. Not sopping wet, but just damp. All right, so while that's wet, I'm going to grab a little darker. We'll start darkening this area up here in a soft way. Keeping in mind, it's going to get darker towards the outer edges. Not only is that so because of the shading of a sphere, but in the reflections, again, to repeat, it's pushing out those reflections in a compressed way. So it just results in a darker look or value. It's like I'm not following my line exactly, so this ball is looking a little lopsided. Try to even that out. That's again exactly why I drew that in watercolor pencil, so that outline would not show. I could adjust this if I needed to, but I did a bad job of following my shape. All right, well, that's not looking too bad. So even in the lighter area, again, this is the one with the light bottom, you will get a little darker edge usually. And I got my biggest highlight on this side, so I may just add a little more shadow on this side. You still have the highlight shadow of a sphere. And I scratched my paper there, but hopefully that'll not show. It's going to be dark. All right, let's add the dark bottom over here. This is still damp, but I think it's dry enough to paint on. And really reflective surfaces, you get a lot of high contrast. Some really dark areas juxtaposed to some really highlight areas. And in this case, that usually is on the edge where this higher horizon, so to speak, is. And what you're going to see is I'm going to be layering and glazing in those gradations until I'm satisfied with the value contrasts. And just remember, when you get to the bulbous part of the bulb, the shapes stretch, and so does the light a little bit. So it becomes a little bit lighter. Your biggest contrast is going to be right in here. And you will see some simplification. So in reality, there may be a lot, and I will add just some little interesting sort of things going on down there. So it's not too perfectly even, because you'll see a lot of variegation. But just keep in mind that the values are going to be grouped very narrowly in these two areas in this sort of generic scheme. What I'm going to do here is bring in a little bit of a reflection, dark reflection. Some of these reflections will kind of appear in pieces and shards. You get your bulb and study it, you'll see everything looks very fractious. So I don't know, I may regret some of this, but maybe a piece here. It still looks pretty good, I think. Let's maybe make a dark reflection down here. It's going to soften because that's still damp. All of those reflected pieces are getting pushed out to the edge in the image and distorted and compressed. And I'm just darkening this side here. This is the opposite side of the biggest highlight. And if these come out looking a little, stylized, I think that's fine. I think that's the point, In the end, it's a design, Maybe you want to use this on a Christmas card or just some sort of little frame decoration somewhere. Have fun with it. I don't think I'm going to need to use gouache. I think probably painting around the highlights has worked okay. All right, we'll come back to this. Let's work on this, and this is going to have the dark top. Now for the dark, I don't think I mentioned, I'm just using the same yellow with some neutral tint. Maybe a little bit of red iron oxide, but I don't want to make the gold too red. Just needs to be a darker yellow. And the easiest way to do that is neutral tint. I'm going to start out light and I'm going to wet the whole area. The gradations are the same, they're just reversed. So you turn that over. Although we may have a few more shadows at the bottom, let's go back, make sure that that's all staying damp as you pull your wash across. I'm on about a 10-degree incline, 20-degree incline. So when I keep it wet, I come back up here. A lot of that filters down. I'm going to add water here in the center just to keep that a little lighter. And I got to make sure that shape rounds up to the edges like this one. The darkest contrasts are going to be right down here. While I'm waiting on that to dry, go ahead and add some shadow down here maybe. You can see I'm going to have to glaze some yellow in there. That's kind of lost its yellowness. I need to do more of that over here too. Here I'm adding just watercolor to dry paper and then softening out the edge. And this is just a shadow more than a reflection, just to keep it looking spherical. All right, so we can pretty much let that be drying, and it's just an adjustment process from here, I think. Once this is all dry, I'm going to glaze some more yellow in there to get that a little more golden. It's just looking a little brown. Feel like this needs a little more unification, so I'm just bringing some dark reflections up here. What's it reflecting? I don't know. Anything. And you don't need to get too logical about this. You just think of these reflections as I mentioned, sort of fractious pieces and shards of whatever is going on in the scene. And, you know, it can be generic. Build these up gradually if you want to. In fact, I'm saying you probably should. Just before you go adding layers, make sure it's dry. One of the biggest mistakes in watercolor I see are artists not letting previous layers dry, trying to do too much too soon, and then they just get a big back run, washy, muddy mess. I know these things because I've done it more times than I can count, okay? A lot of your biggest, darkest contrasts are going to be along that little twisting, curving horizon. And that's what kind of gives you the reflective magic, if you will. I'm going to add just a couple little kind of interesting pieces of reflections down here. Follow the curves, feel the spear, be the spear. What does that mean, Steve? Get in a reflective state of mind. And I like the way when these things curl up around the edge, everything becomes more compressed. The highlights get thinner, the reflections get thinner, because you're seeing objects that are reflected become compressed as they curve around. Yeah, so this is, as I mentioned at the outset, a great exercise for wash control, but also just it really illustrates pretty well, I think, the process that I go through in observation, characterization of the subject that I see, taking the things that I see and applying them, interpreting them. That's what art's about. I'm feeling the shine, feeling the shine. Look at that shininess. Isn't this fun? All right, so I'm going to probably be putting some really intense yellow glazes over that, but it's got to be bone dry. Let's go up here and render these caps. And take your hottest highlights and kind of line that up with that section, and that's going to be your highlight. So leave a couple of these like little areas almost white. You can, and then just sort of, you'll need some contrast, maybe something here, and each little ratchet or whatever you call little flute will catch a little light, but leave a really hot highlight there. And I'm going to glaze over this too with yellow, but I'm just kind of putting in my shadow. Just treat it real simply. Again, I'm going to lining up with this highlight right in here. This part's going to leave that white. And usually right next to that hot highlight, you'll have a core shadow that's darker. So you can make this little spot right here darker. Oh yeah, we're looking like an ornament now. Just shade this cap maybe a little over the right. It doesn't have to be super detailed. All right, I'm going to go back to my yellow. So it's going to make everything gold. So this ribbon's going to all be gold. I'm just going to put in the light gold just to shape it out first, and then we'll shade it when it's dry. And that's something you can treat more extensively and detailed if you want. I'm just having this sort of as a little embellishment. This is mainly what I'm after. Okay, that's the basic shape, but we'll define that a little better with shading when it's dry. You know, and if you can get the hang of this is great to, you could do a nice little still life cluster of them, maybe different colors. You can add holly or add a Christmas tree branch. You can take this idea. I think this is probably the hardest thing, you know, to render these little reflective balls. Things like Christmas tree branches, that sort of thing. Ooh, shiny. Shiny. It's a song, isn't there, in Moana about shiny?
My stuff is so shiny.
Any Moana fans out there? You know that giant turtle? Don't worry, I'm not breaking out into song about shiny. I have two granddaughters, different ages, but they are like Moana freaks. They're not freaks. They just love Moana. You know what I mean. All right, I'm gonna let those bows dry. Gonna let these completely dry, and then we'll come back for our finishing touches. Now we're gonna work on those bows, which I'm just gonna treat very simply. All right, nothing super special there. Now let's put a yellow glaze over these caps. Well, for the glaze on these, I'm going to use a big brush that has a nice point. That just will allow me to wash over a lot of area more evenly, get it more evenly wet. Now I still want to pay attention to these values and these value gradations, because the last thing you want to do here is start making your ornament look flat. I've got a very bright, pure yellow here. I'm just kissing the paper because I do not want to disturb the paint underneath. So, kiss, kiss, kiss. As Bob Ross would say, 3 hairs and some air. Just float that color on. It's very light. And you see how that just popped that color right up. And then here where it's highlight, just going to blend it out and let that stay light. It can be a little darker down here. And with a little more water, very lightly, just going to slightly tint. I do not want to kill my highlight, but want to have just ever so slightly a yellow cast to that highlight. Oh yeah, now that's great. In fact, I'm going to do some of that to those ribbons up here, just to deepen that gold a little bit. Ah, yeah. See the difference in the color? That's glazing. That's why I like glazing so much. Cotton paper, gotta have cotton paper to do that. I'm sorry, that's just a thing with cotton. Oh yeah. See, I'm really loving what that's doing to the color. Really, the gold was okay before. It was just a little bit lighter gold. But I'm liking this a lot. And you can do the same thing with red, with green, with blue. Just choose your primary, you know, and the colors can stay fairly bold and brilliant. You don't have to neutralize them a lot, except in the shadows. And really just probably neutral tint. That's all you need for the darker color. You know, whatever blue you pick, whatever red you pick, you can darken it with neutral tint. I'm going to let this dry. I have one final touch I'm going to try just on this one. I'm going to get a scrubber and I'm going to soften the top of these highlights just to make them look a little bit, well, soft, but a little bit like blown out. But let's make sure these are fully dry first. All right, we're almost there. I want to try one final thing. I want to try here first. This is a scrubber. It's a very small scrubber. These are extremely stiff. And I just want to try to soften some of the edge, top edge up here. I've got a tissue to blot as I loosen up paint. I got a little bit of an edge on some of these reflections. So number one, I'm wanting to get rid of that. But I'm also wanting to create a soft glint right there. Now I've talked about scrubbers in other videos, but it bears repeating. It's a misnomer. With a scrubber, you don't scrub. I think they're called scrubbers because they are so stiff, but you want to go very, very lightly with scrubbers. And I mean, I can't tell you how lightly I'm doing this, but the action is still there, scrubbing action, because they are such stiff brushes. See how that all softened right there? And I barely did anything. Now part of that is Arches. Arches scrubs really better than any paper I know of. They just really respond to these brushes well. Depends somewhat on your paint as to how staining it is, I guess. The yellow here would be staining. The darker colors not so much. This right here, I really wanted this to look blown out, because this would be like from maybe a single light bulb or something. And I'm just patting. I mean, it's like I'm just patting this. So don't make the mistake of actually scrubbing with the scrubber. I ought to call them lifters. Be patient and just keep patting at it and gently stroking it till you see it soft, and blot with a tissue. I'm not going to do a lot of softening down here, but I've got a bit of a line that I'd like to see disappear. So I just have an edge. And a lot of these reflections, the lines are going to be pretty crisp. I just don't want what looks like a drawn line. But you will see some of them just go kind of cottony in places where you have a bright light and it's just kind of blowing everything out. Little soft edges kind of give it a glow, if you know what I mean. And of course, each time I'm dipping it in water a little bit and rubbing off the excess. You just want it damp. All right, everybody. Well, I'm going to leave it there. I'm pretty happy with that. That was just a fun little thing. And really just some useful skills in there that you can do in a fun seasonal way. Lots of techniques that we've covered. So let me know what you thought. And if you're a patron, post your work over there on the community board. Let me see what you did. I will try for patrons to post a high-res version of this so you can peruse it a little more carefully whenever you are ready to. And thanks so much. We'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.